My name is Jonathan Schick, and I do the digitalization and artificial intelligence advice for EFAA. So EFAA, or the European Federation of Accountants and Auditors for SMEs, was founded in 1994 and is an umbrella organization for national accountants and auditors organizations whose individual members provide professional services, primarily to SMEs within the European Union and Europe as a whole. EFAA for SMEs has 15 members throughout Europe, representing over 400,000 accountants, auditors, and tax advisors. My work at EFAA consists of studying how digitalization, AI, and new technologies have an impact on the industry and provide practitioners with the right advice, not just on how to tackle these challenges, but also leverage its advantages. So welcome to today's episode of our podcast, where we dive into the real-world experiences of professionals navigating the evolving landscape of digital finance. In this episode, which once again follows our latest AI and accounting guide, this one specifically on regulatory and legal implications of AI, we focus on how the AI revolution is treated from a legal and more regulatory standpoint. We look at the AI Act from the EU, its requirements, its risk-based approach, categories, and as well as the necessary documentation and recommended training that goes with it. To explore these topics further, I'm joined today by Paul Roevens. Paul works at UNIZO, where he advises on digitalization and helps shape the digital transformation of self-employed entrepreneurs and SMEs. A word about UNIZO. So UNIZO is the Belgian Association of Entrepreneurs, Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises and Liberal Professions. With over 100,000 members, it is the largest association of its kind and is mainly located in the Flemish and Dutch-speaking region in Belgium. In his role, Paul facilitates all the association's initiatives on digitalization and transformation, currently most focused on artificial intelligence, e-invoicing, cybersecurity, and digital skills, translating European, Belgian, and Flemish regulations into practical guidance for business owners. He also represents UNIZO in various policy and stakeholder platforms at regional, national, and European level. Likewise, the Flemish AI Steering Committee, the Flemish AI Academy, the Belgian e-invoicing group, but also at SME United and the EU Digital SME Association in respective digital working groups. With a strong interest in innovation, technology, and policy, Paul combines strategic insight with a pragmatic approach. His goal, to make small businesses future-proof by keeping digitalization achievable, understandable, and people-centered. So, Paul, we are very glad to have you with us today, that you could join us, especially with all your expertise. I suggest we get right into it. First, maybe on the EU AI Act and its impact that it has given. So how, in your opinion, how has the recently enacted AI Act changed the regulatory environment for SMEs and SMPs? And what would you say are the most persistent misconceptions you encounter about its real impact on these firms?
Well, the Act itself, which in fact entered into force on the 1st of August 2024, transformed the regulatory landscape, in fact, for the SMPs from a voluntary way to something which is now more a comprehensive legal framework. And that's important in respect of what SMPs have to do. So the key changes here are obviously the updated regulatory environment, which now is applicable over all of the 27 member states. A second thing, it is a risk-based approach which is being introduced into the world of AI, where we can assume that for the SMPs we are in the minimal risk atmosphere in most of the circumstances. And very important for the smaller enterprises, the Act recognizes the limited resources and knowledge for those enterprises as part of the Act, which also gives them a bit of more room and flexibility to adapt to it. The misconceptions which I see is that lots of organizations see the Act only targeting the large techs or the large corporations, and that's not the case. When we are here as an SMP, you are mostly a deployer and you're using AI. So it can be that you're using it in a more risk-related atmosphere, eventually even a high risk. So you are eventually vulnerable to the Act. Also that the systems are also in a sort of exempt, particularly when we're looking at standard accounting software. That's not the case. You need to ask your provider if there is no AI embedded software included in it, and ask them what it really does. And the third is that it is easy. Yeah, we try to make it sound easy, but you need to do some work on it before, in fact, let's say implementing whatever IT tool, IT software in your company.
Very interesting. So in case to jump in on that, it's indeed not a change that happens in a way overnight, but the AI Act has a kind of a phased rollout over 2025 and 26. Seeing that, what steps would you say SMPs should be, let's say, prioritizing right now? What early actions could they already do to position their firms ahead of the achieving compliance? In terms
Yeah,
of all these steps that are required, how would you go about that?
as we are looking at August 2026, in fact, the main thing what you really have to do, and I think you put the prioritization, inventorize and classify. That you have to do immediately. In fact, it's a normal thing to first see what you have before you can really improve, and then do also with your providers, as just said, your software which you are in use. Do a kind of maybe a heavy word, a due diligence on that software and the provider, so that for all things you have outsourced with a digital component, you detect the AI impact on it. And then obviously a very important thing, the AI Literacy Act, see that yourself, your employees are being educated in what lies out here. This can be basic, and obviously for those who are more embedded into the daily operations, to a more extent level, and particularly when you're working with AI providers on that. What you have to do to head start it, as you said, yeah. It's a bit it's a technical word. Do compliance by design. It's like we do software by design, compliance by design. So see that you document the things that go for the minimal risk initially. If you exploit something, do also make it transparent and easy when you for example use generative AI, and this can be also out of the normal accounting practice, but make something up and label the things as you use them on all software. And yeah, try to because we know that not everyone is digital native or as adept with digitalization. Use the channels of support, IT providers, and there might be also some subsidies available to get you through this adventure. So use the channels which there are to get help from.
Yeah, I think that's very, very sound advice. I'd like to do with you, if that's okay, a small deep dive into the AI Act itself and particular properties of it. For example, it uses a risk-based approach to AI governance. Could you perhaps provide some practical example of how, let's say, typical accounting AI tools would fit into the AI Act's risk categories, and how SMPs should assess their own systems to kind of determine the appropriate risk classification of it?
Well, yes, I'm going from the high to the low, knowing that the low are the most applicable. But assume you do some kind of employee monitoring on performance, for example, and you're going to the kind of tracking of that. Yeah, that's a high risk exercise, because data is personal. You will have to organize the human oversight on it. You will have the rules to be known, etc. And of course, you have the privacy aspect to be taken into account. Also, when you do a kind of credit worthiness of an individual, even whatever, that's going into the high risk when using AI technology behind that. So that's an example, particularly not on the AI in the accounting itself, because when you're using, for example, queries for your by a chatbot, yeah, that falls more on the limited risk. But anyway, you will have a transparency clarification to be given towards the users, and of course also your employees itself. And then AI-generated correspondence, for example, emails, etc., are also quite important, but it's a limited risk because obviously it can enforce or say something which might be wrongly accepted. So best that also there the human oversight is okay. And minimal, yeah, you have spam filters which are AI now able to workflow into AI accounting from one to the other. Those are absolutely minimal so far. So there are no mandatory requirements because the vulnerabilities are pretty low over there. So that are three, I would call it, examples which you can use in the classification.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. And also the Act makes a distinction between the different roles, as in providers, deployers, and users. You indeed mentioned that most SMPs would situate themselves, let's say, among the deployers. But having said that, what are the implications of these roles? And have you seen, let's say, firms fail due to confusion about the definitions in their AI adoption journey?
Yeah, absolutely. That's with everything. Some organizations don't know if they deploy as a user or provide, and yeah, it can be both in a way. So I do presume that most of the SMPs buy in software and use them. So you will have to have the human oversight, but if you change it and if you put it in your own workflow and you add AI on it, yeah, you come into kind of provider atmosphere. From the moment you I would call it, start to modify software which you buy or which you rent or you integrate it, you should be aware that it might fall under strict obligations. Therefore, the classification which you do is very important. See that you classify them in the right risk level, and you can have that in different things. Let's say that you have a scoring model again on risk from a company, and you use there the appropriate software for, but you classified it as minimal as far, but the AI algorithms start to evolve from the external part. Yeah, it might get to a high risk component tool. So it's not you do it once, you need to regularly redefine to keep yourself adopted towards the rule. So I advise also to do some legal advice when you are unsure about that. I know that might be an extra cost on it, but you don't want to get risk into being fined when you do it wrong by the rules, because the fines, as you know, are pretty heavy here. So do it the classification and do it regularly, like you do with cybersecurity, that you do each in a quarter a review of what kind of software there is, so that you don't get into troubles in the adoption itself.
Correct. Yeah, there's always often people forget there's a cost to not doing things as well.
Correct.
Indeed. Now, to simplify that, the AI Act has a certain kind of simplified compliance pathways and a regulatory sandbox for SMEs. Could you maybe just explain the concept of these regulatory sandboxes and maybe say a word about the benefits that firms have gained through participation in those sandboxes?
Well, sandboxes are in fact places, safe places where you can develop, test, and in fact validate software against the set of rules which are applicable. Most likely, most of SMPs will have to use an IT provider to get things done, because it looks easy, but in the setup of all the things, it's not always that easy to get yourself self-controlled. But very important, you have priority access as an SME to get to do sandboxes, and that's not and obviously you should see it as a risk, a de-risking effect of what you do when you implement something which is vice versa, a supplier or one of your clients, that you do it right the first time. And the documentation from the sandboxes is mostly also quite simplified. So don't hesitate to use that vehicle to test yourself out, and to make no risks or extra risk on what you do. And yeah, what did you gain? I think the reduced bias, in fact, if you have used the sandbox, it's something which gives you a stamp. You come to the process also for external auditors. You can show proof that you have done the compliance validation of things. And yeah, it might also accelerate your things, because if you want to test things on your own in your own environment, it's quite limited. In that respect, you do it a bit in a bigger environment. So it makes you more assured that what you have built works in the complete ecosystem or the complete picture of your business.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, another thing is that the AI Act comes with obligations towards of transparency and needs of documentation towards clients. So can you give a quick overview of what, let's say, documentation and transparency obligations SMPs face under the Act when using AI specifically, and how would you say they could be implemented efficiently while still making sure, obviously, that clients are properly informed about the role of AI when providing services or content to them?
Yeah, on the documentation requirements, yeah, it's very simple. You need to keep logs of the use and the monitoring purposes which you have here regarding your human oversight. So just control what you're doing. That's important, and then just keeping also simplified documentation of all the things. And what I said before, do regularly an update, a control. Take a term, take 3 months, that you revise it also, that everything is kept in sync, because that's mostly forgotten in the whole process. And on transparency, yeah, I think the most we can say on the generative AI component here, the interactions and the information which you provide as part of the usage of the generative AI. So like, please be aware that the conversation is assisted by the AI chatbot or something like that. That are things which you need to be clear with the users you have as part of the Transparency Act, in fact, as part of this rule. And if you do the communication, yeah, see that you're transparent in all times. Make a simple, visible statement. Be clear on the things which you share. Given not everyone is digital native, control it at all times. In fact, do that professionally as part of a potential audit which you get, and the positioning of the AI. You can see it as an efficient improvement and enhancement of your current business. So not replacing things. So yeah, the accountability and the high value which you eventually want to achieve, make that clear in the communication to your clients as part of your digital endeavors for the future.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'd like also to say something about risk management. I mean, you've touched on the topic before, but I think it's a very important one. In light of the significant fines and kind of, if you like, high stakes risk associated with the AI Act, even with the SME protections in place, how should SMPs generally balance risk management with innovation? I mean, it's a general question, but specifically to this case. And would you perhaps know of notable instances of firms either underestimating or even successfully managing the legal exposure?
Well, on the first, I would say it's normal risk management. So in respect of that, I always say try to make that an advantage towards your competitors, because you're living in a competitive world. So take it up as an interesting other way of doing in a positive way and try to make a strategic advantage of your actions in respect of that. It's the same as say you want to do business with a more secure organized organization. Well, that's the same here. That's more of an incentive. Also, when you do the investment on the systems, yeah, obviously do the high risk assessments first. To try to prioritize your actions into the being according the law. And as I said before, you can't do it yourself, this whole adventure. So use the external experience which is there. And again, if there are subsidies, let you help by that. Examples. Well, they mostly relate to HR things for the ones I had before. So training data, for example, which is being used as being kind of being a professional into the business, that might have an impact on the obligation itself, but mostly it's being isolated to be done in the HR department alone, and not in the full organizations. So everything what relates to data sharing, training, etc., would recommend to value that in your classification, as we talked before. So do the inventorization, but do it in all of your departments, particularly on HR, given the AI impact there can be forgotten. Also on fraud detection, that there some people are also trying to get the AI oversight a bit lost, but recommend also there when you control things and use AI, it might get a bit more complicated in the future. So don't underestimate the fact that if you use it for controlling things, whatever, do a risk assessment on it as part of your classification. So in general, do it in detail and prioritize your high risk systems first when you start with your investment, and always do that regular control. Every quarter, do the review amongst your management, and I do think you should fit the obligation pretty fine then.
Indeed, yeah, no, I think that's all very sound advice, and especially I think the transversal approach is something that's often overlooked as an important element of that. One final point that I'd like to do with you. So generally, with ongoing developments in AI regulations signaled by the Act, how would you say SMPs should build internal capacity and agility in their compliance strategies, generally to deal with all that? And maybe just a personal question to you, personal advice or insight. What do you anticipate will be the next, let's say, major regulatory challenge or opportunity for accounting professionals working with AI? Just towards the future, what do you foresee?
Well, on the first of all, work on that mandatory AI literacy. You can start simple. Suggest also to make it a bit fun and try to make it as a normal thing in your life. Bit difficult at this moment, probably because of the widespread. But yeah, you can hang this onto your organization AI policy, for example. Also on the governance, as I said, don't look at it as a one-off. I've done it, and then now control it, keep it under control, because and that's then a look into the future, because other things will come near, and it might be a good instance, this whole exercise, to look at your data, because data is anywhere spread, and we know that not all data is very well managed into the environment. So try to use also this inventorization, this classification, to look at your data, because you might find also some holes into that process and the management of it, which might be unsecure. So make it future-proof as part of the exercise and don't take it as a one-off. On what comes next, I presume our government is also getting smarter by using AI. So I do think the accountability or maybe the audibility from the AI-generated financial data might be something which comes up in a later instant. But I think the most thing is that this act, but also the other acts which are around data and whatever is here on the plate is GDPR. I was looking the word GDPR. That you have it all together, and that as an accountant or an SMP practice, you might be the most trusted advisor at a certain moment by doing it right the first time. So look at it in the positive way, and we do hope that by doing all of the things which are required here, it might give you a competitive advantage eventually to a competitor, but certainly as a trusted party towards the enterprises which are also in terrible need to get help on this AI Act. So.
Yeah, no, that's indeed, I think, a nice look at it, a nice way to conclude as well, and that's very useful advice. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you for joining us for this insightful conversation, and a very big thank you to Paul Roevens for his insightful advice and making the time to speak with us today. As usual, we'd also like to thank all the experts at EFA for their input and for supporting this important discussion. If you found today's episode helpful, be sure to visit the EFA website for more resources and updates on digital developments affecting the professions. Also, if you haven't had a chance, check out our AI and accounting guide that delves deeply in the topics we discussed today. And don't forget to tune into our next episode, where we'll continue exploring the tools and trends shaping the future of accounting and finance. Thank you, and until next time.